So the next most important thing that we need to learn to do as pipers is learning how to articulate the instrument. Now, what does that mean? Well, if you were a guitar player, you would articulate your notes by plucking the string. If you were a piano player, every time you push down on a key, you are articulating the note. For a classical string player, it's every stroke of the bow, and so on and so forth in that manner. But it gets a bit more complex when we're talking about wind instruments. So as a wind instrument player, your means of articulating a note would be causing a disruption in the airflow from your mouth through the mouthpiece. And of course, that's the case for every wind instrument, except of course for the bagpipes, because as I've prattled on about no end in this video series so far, there is no direct connection between the air coming out of here and the air ultimately coming out of the bag. Now, to disambiguate that from the chanter, obviously, as we know when we're practicing on the practice chanter, that there is a direct connection. Only the air coming from here is what is producing the sound through the chanter, but when we get to the pipes it's a different story because we have the big bag in the middle which is acting as a reservoir. So how then do we articulate the notes? Now if you don't know what that means in practice, well, I'm going to show you something. So I'm going to play for you a well-known tune on the bagpipes. I'm going to play it on the chanter, of course. It is called Scotland the Brave, but I'm going to play it with absolutely no articulation whatsoever. Okay? Now, obviously that tune was recognisable in a pinch, but there was no articulation there at all. There was no separation between the notes other than physically moving from one note to the next. It was missing the articulation, and when I'm talking about articulation, of course, I mean a sort of a very definitive kind of noise that's in the note there. That, you know, like when you're talking, when you're saying T's and P's and B's, you know, there's a very different sound which is shaping the beginning of that sound. This is not something that can be done using your mouth on the pipes. The only thing you have that you can do this with is your fingers, and this is where the concept of our embellishments come in on the pipes, and this is what gives the bagpipes its very, very distinctive sound. Now I'm going to play that tune for you again, but this time with the embellishments, and I want you to listen out as to why that's so different. I won't play the whole tune, but you get the point here. You could hear throughout that tune, you can see my fingers obviously moving a bit more dramatically than they were the first time, but you could hear through that tune little sort of beep and kind of noises like that. These are the embellishments, and these are the things that are giving the soul, the character to the performance of the instrument. It sounds different on the practice chanter than it does on the full pipe chanter. The full pipe chanter adds a bit more of a gravitas, a bit more of a real crack, to coin a phrase from Fred Morrison, and that's the best way to describe it. It's a proper crack sound that you get from that, and this is why it's so important to learn these things now, so that you can put them to effect. Because in addition to that, when it comes to actually reading the music for bagpipes, you're going to see lots of different things that you won't see anywhere else on any other instrument, because they have been designed specifically for the bagpipes, and these are all the embellishments. But we're going to start simply, okay? The first step in learning how to play the embellishments is learning what we call the grace notes, okay? Now, allow me to go into a little bit of background very quickly, okay? First and foremost, if you are a musician already and you have considerable experience in playing another instrument, you know what the concept of a grace note is, okay? For those of you who have no concept of the musical world beyond this, a grace note is Exactly that. In every other instrument, a grace note is a little bit of ornamentation, a little bit of decoration. It is not used for any other function other than to dress up the note that you're playing. They're still played more or less at the same speed on other instruments as they are in the bagpipe world, but their purpose is radically different. Now, every note on the chanter except for low G can be a grace note, okay? The baseline criteria for a note to be able to perform as a grace note is that it must have at least one note lower than it on the chanter. Hence, low G cannot be a grace note, okay? But everything from low A all the way up to high A can serve as a grace note. How we actually play the grace notes physically is different in terms of how we play a melody note of the same name. Now, let me disambiguate that for you for a second. So the first grace note that we're going to look at today is the high G grace note. Now obviously high G is a note in and of its own right, and it looks like this. Now the grace note high G is written in a smaller script, written in a different way, a different rhythmic marking, but it actually still lives in the same vertical space as the melody note high G. But the big difference between the two is how we finger them. Okay, now obviously when we're playing high G, you know, we're doing this. We're just keeping our top thumb on, and those three fingers are off and the lower finger's on. So, in essence, when it comes to playing a grace note, we're only going to do enough to open the respective hole that would produce that note normally, okay? And if that sounds confusing, let me illustrate that for you. So, this is us playing a melody note high G, okay? So I'm fingering it properly. But when we play the grace note high G, we're simply, from low A, of course, as is the case here, I'm simply going to lift my top finger here. We're opening that and closing it. Okay? Now, what it actually ends up doing is it ends up producing just a slightly different sound, but because it's played so quickly that there isn't enough time for it to establish itself as a melody note. We're not really worried about that so much. What we're actually looking for is a sort of chirping sound. So it's going to sound like this when it's played at full speed. Can you hear that? It's just going beep, beep, beep. But the effect that it's having, if you listen to that by itself, obviously it would just sound like a high G, but the effect of it being a means to disrupt our playing our low G, our low A there, sorry, is enough for it to sound like a chirping sound. And certainly on the pipe chanter, when we play it, it has more of a crack to it and more of a boop, like almost as if you were just kind of going with your tongue, disrupting the airflow. So the important thing here is that remember that you're only opening the hole that is relevant to that note. You're not properly fingering it like it's a melody note, okay? We're just simply going to open the hole and close it again. And you can take your time over at the moment, but the goal ultimately is to play it quickly enough for it just to sound like a chirp. Okay? When you're practicing it, I urge you not to get into the habit of waving your finger up and down like you're a police siren, so not this. That defeats the purpose of this. The purpose is to lift your finger up and down as quickly as you can to sound the note, but the point is that it's acting as a means of articulating the note that you're playing continuously behind it. So in this case, either low G or low A. So if you want to go through a process of practicing that, the important thing is that you're putting emphasis on the low A and that your finger is only opening up and closing maybe like once a second or something like that. And if you want to practice that with a metronome as well, you know, you could practice maybe doing one grace note per beat or two grace notes per beat, however many you want to do, but as long as it doesn't sound like you're a police siren. That's not where we want to be. It's nice and quick. Okay, practice that. It doesn't have to be as fast as that at the moment, but understand that over time, when you're more confident with the movement, you do want to speed it up slightly. Okay. The highest note that you can physically play a G grace note onto is F. So if you think about that in practice, the G grace note, you can't play a G grace note on G because you're already playing G. You certainly can't play a G grace note onto A. It's physically impossible. So the only note that you can play it to is F. But you can play it all the way up from low G up to F.